Senator Paul, when you and I were both elected to the Senate back in 2010, I remember the national debt was an issue then. It was becoming large enough that people were concerned about it. And as it mounted, sometimes we had conversations about how long it might continue, how long it might continue to spiral upward. You surprised to see that here we are 11 years later, 11 years after you and I arrived here, and where it's gone since then?
I guess surprise is not the word I would choose. I would say disappointed. You know, the Tea Party movement, we had 100,000 people on the mall out there. People were concerned about the debt. They were concerned about constitutional government. I remember you and I meeting for the first time and talking about how we needed to reverse some of these terrible precedents that had allowed government to grow large, and that the courts need to reform government as well as government be reformed from its elected officials. But yeah, we had a great debate that summer. In the summer of 2011, we said we wouldn't raise the debt ceiling without reform.
Do you remember, if the gentleman will yield for a question again, I believe it was during that summer that a number of people started focusing on emerging economic research, including research proposed by Professors Rogoff and Reinhardt at Stanford University, suggesting that whenever the debt to GDP ratio exceeds a certain level, exceeds roughly 100%, 1-to-1, certain things start to happen and economic growth becomes more elusive. Now, as I recall, we were nowhere close yet to the 1-to-1 ratio. Now that we've blown past that, what do you think that ought to tell us about the fact that even as we've blown past that point, we're now being asked to raise the debt ceiling by larger and larger amounts, or sometimes for a time period without any reform? What does that do to us?
Yeah, I remember when a couple of years after that, we actually became that our economy was equal to our debt. So the gross domestic product, how much everything's worth that's produced in the whole country, it was about 17 or 18 billion at the time, as the debt sort of crossed that. We're now, depending on how you measure it, some say at like 140% of our GDP. And the interesting thing is, that's about where Greece was when Greece began to declare its bankruptcy and was unable to pay its bills. It is alarming. It is foolish and unwise for us to say, oh, there are no consequences. I think there will be consequences, and the number one that we're seeing now is inflation.
You know, we've seen with our status as the United States as having the world's reserve currency, the U.S. dollar has given us some flexibility in that area, flexibility that other countries like Greece haven't had. Do you think there's some risk of becoming overly confident in that world reserve currency status? In other words, could we be jeopardizing the very thing that we fought so hard to achieve and that so few nations ever achieve?
Yeah, and I think that you're right. Having the world's currency allows us, many countries trade in dollars. You'll go into marketplaces all around the world, and what they're actually exchanging is dollars. So as we've bought more goods than we've exported, we import more than we export, we've paid for that in dollars. Some have described that as being able to export our inflation. People have also said, well, the dollar isn't perfect. It's a fiat currency. It's being inflated. But everybody else is so bad that we're sort of the cleanest shirt in a closet full of dirty shirts. So yes, I think being the reserve currency has allowed us to last longer, but there are immutable rules of economics that eventually catch up to a country. And I think we approach those. I don't think anybody can predict exactly when we get there, but I think we are approaching a time, and it may not be a gradual unraveling. If you look back at the history of our marketplace, we've had these black swan events. We've had these events where the marketplace, in 7 or 8 days in our history, most of the losses have happened calamitously. Even in 2011, when the market went down, there was a debate. They said, oh, it was because we risked the debt ceiling. Well, many of us thought that the marketplace went down at that time because we actually continued to borrow without reforming the process.
In an economy where the currency in circulation isn't backed up by any tangible object, and where the government has effectively the ability to just print more money, even if that currency happens to be the world's reserve currency, at some point after you keep printing money, doesn't that cause problems?
It's based on faith. And so when does the faith end? Faith is not something particularly, it's hard to determine faith in the dollar. And one way you can determine it is, will people buy our bonds? And so one of the indications that people lose faith in a currency is that when to borrow money, you see your bond prices rise, you see interest prices rise. And I think that's coming. You know, we're already seeing inflation at a 5% rate. Typically, you'll see the interest rates rise as well. And there is going to be a time, there are going to be repercussions. I fully believe that you cannot continue to borrow at this rate without ultimately suffering perhaps an economic calamity. And I want to stop that for our country.
All right, folks, thank you so much for joining us here at Golden State Times. If you're new to the channel, we encourage you to subscribe by clicking that middle button. Also, check out our previous video by clicking the video on the right, or a video you might enjoy by clicking the video on the left. Also, don't forget to click the thumbs up button and share this video on social media. Peace.